Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Coburn, and today's episode is going to be a little bit different. We're going to be previewing the Arizona Cardinals season with analytics. And whenever you do team-based analytics, things get a little confusing in terms of how you do your grading, and then of course there's debates and there's all this kind of stuff. But at this point I really don't care what people think about data in general. If you disagree with the rankings or how a player is graded, that's fine. Just understand that these are based on what they've done so far in their career, what they've done on paper, and of course what they could potentially do based on what they did at the college level. And the way we're going to do this is I went through every single team in the NFL and I graded each position, and I looked at what their total potential was, if they had all-pro potential, Pro Bowl potential, starter potential, and backup potential. If they were a Pro Bowl player, they got 4 points. If they were all-pro player, they got 4 points. If they're a Pro Bowl player, they get 3 points. If they are a starter, they get 2 points. And if they're a backup, they get 1 point. And just went through each position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive tackle, offensive guard, offensive center, edge, defensive tackle, linebacker, cornerback, defensive safety. Went through all those positions, graded those positions, and then ultimately got to a number. And the teams that have more all-pro players, more Pro Bowl players, more starters are going to look better. They're going to have a better cumulative score. I'm still working on the quarterback factor to this because, a lot of people don't really understand that, a quarterback who is very good can kind of mask some of the sort of issues on a roster, which it happens every year. And that's the only thing is, should I give more points to quarterbacks that are Pro Bowl quarterbacks, that basically succeed despite the fact that their team isn't really that great around them? We'll see. But the bottom line is, this is kind of how the grading system is going to work. We're going to look at potential wins and losses. So looking at the roster, saying, okay, which games are most likely wins based on the talent that the Cardinals have versus the talent that they're facing. Which teams are likely losses based on talent, between the two teams. Which are some teams that are a bit of a push, like maybe a tie or too close to call. And on top of that, we'll get to what their potential win-loss could be based on paper. We're going to look at some big tests of the offense and defensive line. Basically, the biggest weeks where they will have to bring their A game when it comes to prepping for those types of games. And I don't know, we're just going to go through a lot of different things. And let's get to at least the first part. I just wanted to highlight where the Arizona Cardinals stack up in terms of their biggest strengths on the team and some of their weaknesses. When it comes to the biggest strengths on the Arizona Cardinals team, the first big strength is just with their secondary. It's a very talented secondary. They did lose Tony Jefferson in the offseason, but they did replace him with someone in Budda Baker who has fairly good data backing him. Antoine Bethea is still there, who has declined a bit in his career, but he is someone who at the very beginning had a lot of positives to him. Patrick Peterson, of course, is an all-pro level talent all around at the position. And in general, that is the deepest or the best sort of aspect of their defense, is their secondary overall. On the offensive side of the ball, the biggest positive, of course, is David Johnson, but the only issue with the running back position on the Cardinals is that they just don't have a lot of depth of talent on the roster. David Johnson is essentially a Steven Jackson level athlete who has produced as much, if not more so, than a Zeke Elliott, for example, in his career up to this point. And with a less talented offensive line than Zeke Elliott as well. However, behind him is Andre Ellington, who, based on his analytics, is more so a backup/reserve, which has been most of his career on the Cardinals, as being sort of a committee back. TJ Logan, based on his analytics, is more so a committee back. Kerwin Williams is more of a committee back. So they have a very super duper talented running back in David Johnson, but they just don't have a lot of stuff behind him to kind of step in and bring you that same level of talent. So that's the really only issue with the running back position, is that they are very talented at that position. Obviously, when you have a running back of David Johnson's talent, you're going to have a lot of positives there. However, there just isn't a ton of depth behind him. There isn't a guy who can kind of replace or kind of get behind that type of guy. On top of that, I think the linebacker position, if you just look at it on paper, has a lot of positives as well. Deone Bucannon and, of course, Hassan Reddick are two guys who have lots of athleticism traits to fill that position fairly well. I would like Deone Bucannon to move back to safety. I doubt that's going to happen. But I do think that when you look at that linebacker group, it's a solid group. It's a solid group of linebackers when you look at them. So, there's lots of positives, at least from that sort of aspect to their team. Their wide receiver group is fairly deep. It's not the deepest in the NFL by any stretch of the imagination. They have a lot of guys on the roster that have to prove their worth. Guys like Chad Williams and Krishan Hogan, who are rookies this year, put up starter threshold metrics for a potential starting wide receiver. Like, they have the athleticism of a starting wide receiver and they have the production of a starting wide receiver. They just haven't exactly won a job yet or have contributed in a major way, but they do have enough stuff there that it's a strength. And of course, when you have Larry Fitzgerald, it also bumps things up a bit when it comes to their wide receiver core. So there's positives from that aspect as well. The negatives, though, with this Cardinals team is the offensive line is not the greatest offensive line ever. There are issues with the team when it comes to guys like DJ Humphries. He doesn't really have Pro Bowl or All-Pro upside when it comes to his athleticism. And this is just DJ Humphries when it comes to his athleticism traits. And mainly it revolves around his height traits. He's about 6'5"-ish. And the majority of multiple All-Pro and Pro Bowl tackles are at least 6'6" or higher. And on top of that, most of the very good 6'5" offensive tackles, in fact, all of the 6'5" offensive tackles that have become elite, had elite all-around traits. 90+ percentile athleticism traits in terms of explosiveness, speed, and flexibility. And DJ Humphries, as you can see here, does not have elite overall traits. He has some above average traits in terms of athleticism, but he doesn't have great traits all around in terms of his profile. So he's simply someone that is just not going to so far his career is kind of living up to this issue. It's he just doesn't have all-pro potential. At least the only thing that he really has is starter potential, and I think that's the least you could expect of him. But he is going to be somewhat of a liability when it comes to certain edge types and that other sort of stuff. So he's just kind of an issue from that perspective. Mike Iupati is a little bit long in the tooth. So their line is just kind of up in the air this year. They just do not have a dominant overall offensive line in terms of the athletes that they have on the roster. And the quarterback position is scary because you have Carson Palmer, and every single quarterback behind Carson Palmer and Drew Stanton and Blaine Gabbert and Zach Dysert and Trevor Knight all have backup to reserve caliber analytics in terms of their data profiles. So it's just a tough sort of thing. The strengths of this team are decent, but there's just nothing overwhelmingly dominant about this team. There's parts of this roster that are very average, and that is just sort of an issue that they have. Like, that's the main reason why some of the, why I don't want to say this is a super negative thing, but a lot of the stuff that's about this team, there's just too many things that are average about this team when it comes to their talent at many positions, and I think that will hurt them a good deal in 2017 because of that issue. Now let's get to the toughest matchups. The toughest games that Arizona will have, is first off, they have Tennessee week 14. That's a really tough game. because one, Tennessee has a super duper talented, very great analytically minded quarterback in Marcus Mariota. They have by far one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, which helps him out a lot as well. They have a improved receiving core based on the data. They have added a lot of wide receivers to that core to improve it, to make it substantial. They have a fairly decent edge group and defensive tackle group. Their linebacker and secondary group are just kind of average, but they just have a lot more above average qualities to this team than Arizona. And as a result, they are by far the one team that, based on the data, is looking like the worst matchup overall, because they just have a lot of things on their roster in terms of their offensive line and their defense that is just going to make that a tough outing to win when it comes to them, especially because they have a very talented quarterback as well. And the same situation comes with the Dallas Cowboys. They are by far another super duper tough team that the Arizona Cardinals will have to try to beat. They are very similar to the Titans in that they have super talented offensive line talent, decent all-around wide receiver core this year based on the data, a fairly talented quarterback in Dak Prescott, very strong linebacker group for Dallas as well, with a improved secondary to a certain extent. It's still somewhat average, but it's improved. And Dallas will really be overwhelming offensive attack with them. With a fairly somewhat improved defense. So they're going to be a very tough outing as well. The Seattle Seahawks, always a tough matchup, always a tough team to deal with. This year's no exception. Russell Wilson is Russell Wilson. The running back group is not the same that it used to be, but they do have guys who can at least give them starter potential at that spot. The tight end position for the Seattle Seahawks is also a fairly good strength with Jimmy Graham at the helm, and their cornerback and safety group is by far the best tandem in the NFL in terms of Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, and Cam Chancellor. When they are healthy, they are by far one of the best secondaries in the NFL, if not the best secondary in the NFL, on top of a very strong linebacker group. So that's going to be a tough outing as well for the Cardinals, who play the Seattle Seahawks twice. So that's going to be very tough. And the last team that's going to be sort of the toughest matchup as well is Washington. Washington may not seem like a tough team, but they are. They have a quarterback in Kirk Cousins who is shown to be a above average quarterback when it comes to his data, from his data perspective. They have a very super talented, a fairly talented wide receiver core. The offensive line, they have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL when it comes to their tackle spot and their guard spots. They have a very good edge and defensive tackle group as well, and their safety group is underrated too. So Washington is going to be a bit of a tough sledding too when it comes to the schedule in terms of facing them in Week 15. So that's going to be tough. That's going to be a very, very, very tough sort of outing as well for them. So I would say the Cardinals have a lot of things to deal with, a lot of different aspects that are just kind of tough, when it comes to their schedule from those particular teams. The weakest teams on the schedule that they face are the New York Giants, and I know you might think, New York Giants, what? But when you look at the New York Giants from a data perspective, they have a lot of positions on the team that are just not, that are below average, like significantly below average. The running back group on the Giants is not that great. Their offensive tackle group is one of the worst in the NFL. Their guard position is one of the worst in the NFL. Their linebacker group is one of the worst in the NFL. And their defensive tackle group is now one of the worst in the NFL because they let they basically let their best defensive tackle leave in the offseason. So they do have a ton of depth in terms of wide receiver and tight end this year, and of course Eli Manning, and they do have a fairly decent edge group, but there's just a lot of really major weaknesses on this team. So the Giants are close. The Cardinals have an edge because they just have a much better all-around team. You know, they're not as weak as the Giants when it comes to their entire team. It's just that the Giants are kind of... The Giants are only beating you when it comes to having elite talent at certain positions, but the overall team of the Giants is not constructed very well. So that's one reason why the Giants are kind of one of the weaker teams that you'll face, is just because as a whole their team is just not that great. They have aspects of the team that are elite, but the entire team as a whole has a lot of positions that are just really below average when it comes to talent. The San Francisco 49ers are another team that you're going to play twice, and they are one of the weakest rosters in the NFL right now, even after the type of draft that they had, which is a very good draft. They're still weak when it comes to quarterback. Their running back group is weak. Their wide receiver group has always consistently been weak. The center position is kind of a mess. The edge group is all over the place. The cornerback group is bad, and they have gotten better. That, you know, they've added some strengths, but I just don't think it's enough to really have to worry about them too much this year because of the issues that they have at quarterback especially. And then, of course, the Rams. The Rams are another team that are fairly weak based on offense. Their defense is still the defense. They have a very talented edge group and defensive tackle group, but the wide receiver and tight end group is just not great on paper. Jared Goff, based on all my data and based on how he performed last year, Jared Goff was basically the worst quarterback last year based on paper. So it's not good, and they have to stick with him because they invested so much in him. So the bottom line is the Rams are just not a very strong team. They definitely got a little bit better in the draft, but not to the extent that's really going to change what they were. Like, I expect them to be a team picking in the top 5 or top 10 based on the roster that they are going into this year with, and that's without injuries. You know, this is with nobody on the roster getting injured, so they may be even worse if injuries start to pile up for the Rams. Detroit Lions are another weak team that you're going to face. You may not think it because they have Matthew Stafford, but they have Matthew Stafford, and then they have a fairly weak running back group. None of those running backs really stick out that much. They're all these committee types that are easy to game plan for because you always know what's happening whenever the running back's out there. They have their they have their pass catching back and their their power back. So like it's so obvious the situations and what they're doing based on the running back, their personnel essentially. The wide receiver group is a fairly weak group as well. Based on paper, the tight end group is really weak in general, and they do have a fairly decent offensive line, but of course Taylor Decker got injured, which helps you a good deal because of that. It kind of drops the Detroit Lions down as well, and their defense is, at least the safety position of the defense, is one of the weakest in the NFL as well. So Detroit Lions are also another team that's fairly weak that you should have some success against, and the Colts. The Indianapolis Colts are another sort of team that is fairly a fairly good bet that you'll win that game because of the weaknesses that they have on their roster in terms of the running back position, the wide receiver position, the tight end position, the guard position, defensive tackle, linebacker are just really bad. And despite the fact that they do have Andrew Luck and they do have positives in terms of some aspects of the team, they just have a lot of positions on their team that are just below average that just give you the advantage in those particular games. So after going through all that, projections for this year, based on the data that I've seen and analyzed, I expect the Cardinals to have an 8-win to 7-win year. And that's, again, barring injuries, because this could change. If a significant player on a certain team has an injury, this could help them out tremendously. So just keep that in mind. But so far, looking at their schedule, I see Detroit and the Colts as a win. I see Dallas as a loss. I see the 49ers as a win. I think they drop to the Eagles and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They beat the Rams. They beat SF. I think they sweep the majority of the conference. In terms of not the AFC, but the NFC West. I think they sweep most of that conference, and ultimately will probably win that conference if they can just pick up a win here or there. But I still think it's just kind of a weak team overall. I see Seattle. I see Seattle beating you guys twice. I see Houston as a loss, a close loss, but a decent loss by about a point margin in terms of their data. Jacksonville is kind of a push because you do have similar talent when it comes to Jacksonville and your team. The Rams, again, I think you win that one. Tennessee in Week 14, I think, is a loss. Washington is a loss. The Giants is a win, and Seattle is a loss. So I think the best you can expect this year, based on paper and analytics, is a 500 team. I think the main things to consider to target in the future is to get a better quarterback, to improve the offensive line, to improve the tight end spot, to increase edge, especially to try to increase that spot as well. And I think if you do that, you'll start to see some major improvements. But as of right now, I just don't see enough positives to really say that the Cardinals will be anything more than a 500 team based on their analytics and also based on the teams that they will face on their schedule. So again, my name is James Coburn. You can find my work at draftcoburn@wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Geometrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well with anybody that you know, and I will talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.